Lifespan development. When we think of development in terms of psychology, we're talking about how people change from the time they are born until the time they die across their lifespan. There are specific age-related behavioral and mental processes that people experience at various stages of life. So we're going to talk about a lot of the first 8 major stages in life and some things that happen as a result of that. First off, there are some assumptions that influence the way people practice psychology. First off, there's the idea of original sin, that children are born basically bad, evil beings, and that's kind of a biblical thing. There's the idea of a tabula rasa, which says that children are like a blank slate, and they acquire all their characteristics in life through their environment or their experiences. And there's another belief in the innate goodness that says that children are inherently good. A traditional approach to development says that there's a lot of change in a person's life from the time they're born until they're in adolescence. And then once you reach adulthood, there's not much change, and then there's decline in old age. We don't really subscribe to that idea anymore. Now we know that development happens across the lifespan. People continue to grow and change and think differently and engage in various behaviors as they age. There are 3 goals of human development: maintenance, growth, and regulation. We all want to maintain a certain amount of homeostasis, grow and develop, and we want to be able to regulate our emotions. There are 2 factors that we know impact development. There's genetics, or your nature, and the environment, or your nurture. Genetics refers to any type of family traits, your physical appearance, your height, your hair color, your eye color, similarities you have with your other family members. Environmental factors refer to things in a person's immediate surroundings that impact their life. It could be their family's income level, housing, nutrition, education, parenting styles, play opportunities, access to health facilities, and even the weather. So here are the 8 developmental stages that people go throughout in their lifespan, and we're going to talk about these in detail. Starting with early child development and infancy. Notice that as far as the brain goes, when a child is born, look at those neurons. There's not much there. They're just starting to form. Remember, as children start to receive things in their environment and notice things that are happening, by 3 months, look at all the connections that are happening. And then by 15 months, 6 years, and then 14 years. So you can see those connections can tend to get more elaborate and complex. Maturation is a developmental timeline for a person to do something based on their genotype or their genes. So walking, language, reaching puberty, they are all universal things that happen at roughly the same time for all individuals in a culture. Variations in timing are going to only be due to environmental influences such as nutrition. So when we speak of development and we talk about developmental milestones, same way we talked about with language, we're talking about the bell curve. All of these things happen on average, and we know that there are some people who are above average and some people who are below average. When it comes to research on development, there are 2 different types of research methods that can be done to measure a person's development. A cross-sectional research design looks at a number of people at various ages all at one time and provides information about that particular age group's functioning. A longitudinal design measures a single individual or a group of individuals over an extended period of time, and it tells you if there are age changes. So we can either look at a group of kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth grade children, and then look at what's happening to them at that particular time, or we can look at everybody in a class for a long period of time. The first stage of development is the prenatal stage. It happens from conception to birth. It lasts for about 9 months, and an infant who's in the womb will reflexively grasp anything, mainly the placenta, that reaches their hand. Teratogens are harmful substances, chemicals, or viruses that can reach an embryo during prenatal development. And if those things do reach the embryo, then it can cause problems for the baby. The placenta's job is to screen out anything that's harmful. But of course, it can't do all the work if a mother is doing drugs or alcohol. Some of that will get through the placenta. Fetal alcohol syndrome is one disorder that can result after a baby has been exposed to prolonged alcohol use. The infancy stage happens from birth to about 18 or 24 months. It's a time of extreme dependency on adults, and that's also when psychological activities start to begin as they watch their environment. During this time, motor development happens. First, children learn to roll over, to sit up, to crawl, and to walk. In the United States, 25% of infants have learned to walk by the time they're 11 months old. By the time it's time for their first birthday, within a week of the first birthday, about 50% of children know how to walk. And then by 15 months, almost all 90% of babies know how to walk. It can vary by culture. And of course, if you have a culture that emphasizes walking at a younger age, that would be nurture, then of course a child will. So if a parent is constantly on the floor with their child and encouraging them to walk, they could walk as early as 10 months. Identical twins tend to walk on the same day or within a couple of days of each other. And we know that that is a result of nature or genetics. The next stage is early childhood. It happens from about the end of infancy to 5 or 6 years old. Those are known as the preschool years, when children start to become more self-sufficient, develop reading skills, spending time playing with their peers, and learning to interact with others. During early childhood, children progress through 3 stages of play. There's solitary play, where at first the child plays on their own. Then they move on to parallel play, where they can be in the same room, maybe at a daycare with other children, and they're all playing, but they don't know how to interact with each other. To eventually going into cooperative play, which is where they play together and work together. Middle and late childhood happens from about 6 to 11 years of age. Those are the elementary school years, where those fundamental skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic are mastered, and the child is exposed to the larger world and culture. This is also a time of emotional and social development. The child has close ties with its parents, and friendships become very important. Cliques can become formed. They're going to always mostly be the same sex, and those terms, boyfriend and girlfriend, have no meaning. It's all about developing friendships. Then in adolescence, it is the time period of transition from being a child to becoming an adult. It can happen between ages 10 and 12, or as late and last until about ages 18 to 22. It's a time of rapid physical changes due to puberty. It's the pursuit of independence, and the goal of adolescence is to discover your identity. Adolescents start to think more abstractly and logical and idealistic. There's also the idea of adolescent egocentrism, where adolescents believe that everything is about them. There's an imaginary audience which adolescents tend to think that everybody is watching them, so they might have a little bit of stage fright and not want to get in front of others and make a speech. There's the idea of a personal fable, which is believing that their experiences are unique and nobody understands me. Only my friends. My parents can't understand because of a personal fable. Hypocrisy is the adolescent belief that I am going to be extremely judgmental of others and they shouldn't do things, but it's okay for me to do whatever it is I want to do. But oh my gosh, other people should not do that. I can't believe she did that. And then you do it yourself. Pseudo stupidity is the adolescent tendency to overanalyze a situation and make it more into something that it's not. It's also a time of social development. Adolescents tend to want to break away from their family and their parents and have more of a relationship with their peers. Then in early adulthood, that can start from the late teens to the early 20s and last all the way to the 30s. That's the time of establishing personal and economic independence, a time of career development, deciding if you want to select a maid and start a family and rear children. Middle adulthood occurs from about age 40 or so and can extend to about 60. It's a time of expanding personal and social involvement and responsibility, trying to assist the next generation, mainly kids usually, into becoming competent adults. It's the time of reaching satisfaction in your career. Women during middle adulthood can experience menopause between 45 and 55. They could also have decreased production of estrogen, and that can cause some serious psychological mood swings and loss of sexual interest. For men, there's also a decline in hormone levels. Although men can continue to father children into their 70s or 80s, men might start to gain weight and lose muscle strength and have some sexual decline as well. In late adulthood, that occurs from the 60s or 70s and lasts until death. That's a time of decreasing strength and health, a time of life reflection, retirement, and taking on new social roles. When it comes to aging, from a biological standpoint, as people age, their body deteriorates. From a psychological standpoint, people can be happy or unhappy no matter which stage they're in. Research has shown us that the more optimistic a person is, the happier and healthier and the longer their life will be. Again, when it comes to age and happiness, there's no particular age group that says they're more happy or satisfied than another age group. People tend to primarily remember their experiences at their current age and not really want to go back to any of the previous ages. There is a grief cycle, according to Kubler-Ross, which says that when a person experiences a loss, they can go through these 5 stages. And it doesn't go as a pattern, or it doesn't have to go in order. People can experience these 5 stages in any way, starting with denial. And that is a time of avoidance and shock and fear regarding a situation a person might be in. A person could also experience anger and frustration and sadness. They could feel depressed, overwhelmed, and helpless. They could try to bargain and find meaning and reach out to others and tell their story. And then finally, acceptance, which is being able to move on and have a new plan in place. But I want to be clear that you don't have to start with denial to get to acceptance. Somebody could start at depression and then go to denial and then to bargaining and then to anger before they get to acceptance. So it doesn't go in a particular order. When it comes to cognitive development, according to Jean Piaget, people, and he studied children, think differently depending on their stage of life. So he developed some IQ tests and had children answer questions and realized that some of these kids are getting the same answers correct and the same answers wrong. So maybe children think differently than adults. He said that children are actually active thinkers and always trying to make sense of the world. And in order to make sense of the world, they develop what he calls schemas, which are frameworks or ways at looking at and interpreting things. For example, we all have a schema for what is a mother. If I asked everybody to explain what a mother is, one person might say it's somebody who nurtures children, and another person might say it's someone who gives birth to children. But the truth of the matter is, there are plenty of mothers who don't give birth to children, who adopt children and foster children, and they are just as motherly as somebody who doesn't give birth to them. But our schema is how we organize the information in our mind. And depending on your experiences, that's going to create your schema or how you see the world. It's your cognitive blueprint. Piaget also said there are terms called assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is when an infant is able to incorporate new information into their existing schemas. So they are able to quickly learn, oh, I thought a mother was somebody who gives birth to a child, but now I realize that not all mothers give birth to their children. Accommodation is being able to adjust your existing schemas to incorporate new information. And that might be something that's totally different that you hadn't considered. What about animals, for example? So Piaget's stages of cognitive development look like this. There's the sensory motor stage, which happens from birth to about 2 years of age, when, according to Piaget, the child is experiencing the world through their senses. That's why it's called sensory motor. They're looking, hearing, touching, tasting, and grasping things. Object permanence is something that Piaget says develops during this stage. A child has managed or mastered object permanence when they no longer find it fun to play peekaboo. The reason a child likes playing peekaboo is because when you cover your face, a baby automatically thinks you're gone when they can't see you. But once they've learned object permanence, they're going to start to move your hand and realize, hey, you're still there. Stranger anxiety is also a big deal. And then the next stage is the pre-operational stage, which happens from about age 2 to about 6 or 7 years of age. And that is when things to the child are represented by symbols. This is when a child can engage in pretend play, and they are very egocentric. So everything is about me, 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 me. The next stage is concrete operational, which happens from 6 or 7 to about 11. This is when children start to be able to ask questions and think logically, and they are able to form math operations. So, and transformations, they learn the skills of conservation. So if you gave them a tall, slender cylinder and gave them a fat, short one, when they have mastered conservation, they know that they can have the equal amounts of liquid, even though one looks bigger than the other one. From about, age 12 through adulthood is the formal operational stage, when children are able to engage in abstract reasoning and abstract thought and develop their morals. Vygotsky was a cognitive researcher who emphasized the child's sociocultural influence on their development. He said that there's a zone of proximal development, an area between what children can accomplish on their own and what they need help with. So it's the parent or the teacher's job to help children reach that zone of proximal development so that they can do on their own, and if they need help, they can have the guidance through the rest of what they need to do. Many people criticize Piaget because they say that he underestimated the abilities of children. They think that infants reach object permanence a lot earlier than he thought, and that some preschoolers and babies don't have egocentric responses, and that they also believe that he didn't take into account genetic and cultural influences. Lawrence Kohlberg also developed a theory of moral development. He said that there are 3 levels to a person's morality. There's the pre-conventional stage, conventional, and post-conventional. During the pre-conventional stage or level, there are two stages. The first one says that children will develop their morals based on punishment and obedience and self-interest. That means that they'll do things because they are going to gain a reward or to avoid punishment. It's all about me. Stage 2 is instrumental and quid pro quo. So you do for me and I'll do for you. If you help me out, then if you give me a piece of candy, I'll give you a piece of candy. If you play with me, I'll play with you. So that's the lowest level of moral reasoning. Level 2 includes stages 3 and 4. Stage 3 being the good girl, nice boy. That's doing something for social approval. I'm going to make this decision because I want other people to like me. Stage 4 has to do with law and order. I'm going to do this because that is what I'm supposed to do. That is what the rules of society says, and I want to obey the law. Level 3 includes the highest levels, which is post-conventional morality with stages 5 and 6. Stage 5 is about social contract, meaning we can bend the rules as long as it mutually benefits all of society. Stage 6 is when a person gets to the point to where they can defend themselves, they develop their ethics, and they are going to make decisions that are consistent throughout their lifespan. Another stage of development we want to look at is psychosocial development, which was created by Erikson. He developed 8 stages that he say have conflicts that people must resolve at each stage, or it could lead to problems later in life. Starting with the infancy stage, which happens until about age 1. This is where Erikson says children learn to trust or mistrust their parents and caregivers. Because children during infancy are dependent on adults, if adults are not there for them, they could have trust issues in their life forever. During toddlerhood, which is from 1 to 3 years of age, children learn autonomy versus shame and doubt. So they either learn to exercise their own free will and do things for themselves, or they have shame and doubt their abilities to do well. So this is when the independence starts. The third stage is initiative versus guilt, which happens from about age 3 to 6. That is when preschoolers learn to initiate tasks and carry them out on their own, like make their own decisions, or feel guilty because they're trying to be independent. So it's very important for parents to let children develop autonomy so that they don't feel guilt. The fourth stage is competence versus inferiority, and that happens from about age 6 to puberty. This is when children learn the pleasure of applying themselves, or they start to feel less than others. Then the next stage, identity versus role confusion, happens in adolescence. Remember, the goal of adolescence is to develop your identity. So children figure out who they are, or they don't know who they are, and maybe they explore various things before they get to who they are. The next stage is intimacy versus isolation, which occurs in young adulthood. That is when a young person decides, do I want a close relationship and to be with somebody, to get married, to develop romance, or do I want to just be by myself and not in a relationship? The next stage is generativity versus stagnation, which happens between ages 40 and 60. This is when people look back at their life and see, what am I contributing to the world? It usually has to do with family and work, and they feel like they've made a conscious contribution, or they feel like they are stagnant and have lacked purpose. And then the final stage, according to Erikson, is integrity versus despair, which happens from about age 60 until death. This is a time when a person reflects on their life and they're satisfied, or they have regrets. Another term you need to consider for development is attachment. Attachment refers to a strong emotional bond with others that endures over time. Harry Harlow and his colleagues did a lot of research on contact comfort, which would be considered unethical today because we know that people need contact. In humans, we call that strong bond attachment. In animals, we call that strong bond imprinting. They are both needed to promote survival, and they're both related to a very critical period. That's why even if a baby is in the neonatal unit, they are often asked to, be touched, and there are even people who will go and hold babies who don't have family members there, so that babies will learn how to attach. As soon as a baby is born, they're asked, the mother is asked to provide skin-to-skin contact with the baby so that the baby can develop and learn what it feels like to be loved and to be cared for by somebody else during that critical period of just being born. You never want a baby just laying in a baby bed in a hospital and nobody having any exposure to them, or that could lead to some attachment issues later in life. Mary Ainsworth did some research on the 3 levels of attachment. She said that children can have secure attachment with their parents when they seek closeness with the mother when a stranger enters. They use the mother as a safe place, and then they will slowly they will show distress when the mother leaves, and they'll be happy when she returns. Children who are in the anxious or ambivalent stage, they will become upset when their mother leaves, and then they might show mixed emotions whenever she returns. Children in the anxious avoidant stage, they don't seek close contact with the mother and show very little emotion when the mother returns. Mary Main actually added a 4th category, which is the disorganized, disoriented level of attachment, which says that some infants can exhibit avoidant or ambivalent attachment, and they can be confused or apprehensive in the presence of their mother. And here are some pictures that kind of show you the strange situation experiment that was conducted. You can see on picture 1, after the mother and baby spend some time in the experimental room, a stranger enters, and then the mother leaves the baby alone. The baby, when the mother returns, the stranger leaves. The mother leaves, the baby is alone until the stranger returns, and then the mother returns. So this was kind of the research technique she used to see how children responded to their parents. Now, when it comes to biological versus adoptive relatives, we know that genetics plays a role in a person's development, but so does the environment. So there is a strong impact on genetics when it comes to a person's personality. But environment or parenting can also influence religious beliefs, values, manners, attitudes, politics, habits, language, gender roles, and behavior. There are 4 broad parenting styles, and they are based on level of control and demandedness and warmth and responsiveness. So we're going to talk about these levels of parenting. So permissive, neglectful parents are low in a lot of what they provide to their children. They don't make demands. They don't provide structure. They are not emotionally connected to their children. They really don't care what their children do. Those children tend to have social skills, but very little self-control because they try to develop connections with other people. Parents who are permissive indulgent, they set very few limits or demands for their children as well. These children can be highly involved and emotionally connected, and they care about their children, but then they still tell their kids, you're free to do what you want to do. These children can fail to learn respect for others. They can be very impulsive, immature, and out of control. Authoritarian parents are rigid and punitive. They're low on warmth and responsiveness. They don't care what their children want. They want them to just do what they say. These children can be easily upset, moody, and aggressive. Authoritative parents, which is considered in Western society to be the best form of parenting, although if we think of cultural standpoint, authoritative parenting may not always be the best choice. But authoritative parents set and enforce firm limits. They're highly involved. They're emotionally supportive. They let their kids know they care about them, but also let them know that there are rules and the children need to be responsible. It's thought that children who have authoritative parents grow up to be self-reliant, self-controlled, and highly adjusted. In an individualistic culture, the culture values independence and personal strength and goals. In a collectivist culture, interdependence is valued. So it's more about the group and society, not about me as a person. When it comes to cultural differences in child rearing, people in individualistic cultures raise children who are self-reliant and independent, and people in collectivist culture can also raise children who are compliant and obedient. People in Asian and African countries or cultures might raise children to be more emotionally and physically close to others than in many Western European cultures. Temperament and personality is also something that we have to talk about in terms of development. About 65% of babies could be separated into the categories of easy children who are always happy, relaxed, and agreeable, difficult children who are moody and tense, and slow to warm up children who give mild responses. Many of this could be influenced by parenting, but we also know that genetics could play a role. Peers also have an influence on development. Conforming to a whole group and learning social skills from peers are a big thing. Parents may try to indirectly influence the child's peers, but of course, children go to school and they have people in their neighborhood who can also influence them. So when we think about the difference between parents and peers, parents are going to influence more of education and career path, cooperation, religion, responsibility, whereas peers are going to influence cooperation skills, popularity, music, clothing, and good and bad habits. When it comes to sex and gender influences, your sex is your biological characteristics that are determined at birth. Gender are the psychological and social culture meanings that are added to maleness or femaleness, and gender roles are what society expects a male or a female to do. Androgyny has to do with exhibiting both masculine and feminine traits, and gender roles become less rigidly defined in androgyny. When it comes to gender differences and development, boys tend to engage in more risk-taking and aggressive and physical play, whereas girls tend to have higher verbal abilities, spelling abilities, and are less physical and more caring. Boys also tend to focus on the activity and being competitive when they play, whereas girls tend to focus on conversation and connectedness and more of social aspects. Women tend to turn to other people when they want to talk about their problems, which is a term called the tend and befriend response. In college, women tend to change roommates more often and have stronger ties to their family and friends, and also be more involved in religion than males. Social learning theory says that we learn gender roles based on imitation and rewards and punishment. Gender schemas, if we remember, a schema is how we conceptualize something. We have schemas for what we consider male and feminine traits and behaviors. Gender typing is the instinct that drives some children to fit into a particular gender role. I know that's a lot, but that's everything you need to know about development.